The silver ribbon slipped through Maeve's fingers like water. Smooth, perfect, just like everything else had to be tonight. Her hands trembled as she tied the final bow around Taren's anniversary gift, because deep down, she knew the truth. This wasn't about celebrating 3 years together, this was about proving she deserved to stay. Perfect, she whispered, stepping back to admire the small wooden box wrapped in midnight blue paper. Inside lay a carved wolf pendant, their pack's symbol, that had cost her 2 months of herb-selling savings. What followed was the familiar ache in her chest, sharp and persistent, reminding her of what she couldn't give him: children. The fertility herbs on her kitchen counter mocked her with their bitter scent. 3 years of marriage, and her womb remained as empty as the accusations in Elder Grimm's eyes. Yet even so, tonight would be different. Tonight, she'd make Taren remember why he'd chosen her. Moonlight streamed through her cottage windows, painting everything silver. She touched her stomach, flat, barren, worthless, according to pack law. Her wolf stirred restlessly beneath her skin, as if sensing her distress. "He loves me," she said aloud, her voice echoing in the silence. "The moon goddess wouldn't have made us mates if—" The front door slammed open. Taren filled the doorway, his usually warm brown eyes cold as winter stone. Mud caked his boots, and something darker stained his shirt. Blood? Her heart skipped because of that familiar protective instinct surging forward. "Taren? What happened? Are you hurt?" Instead of answering, he stepped inside without removing his boots, something he'd never done before. His gaze swept over the decorated cottage, the candles she'd lit, the feast she'd prepared. Rather than softening, his expression grew harder. "We need to talk." His voice carried no warmth, no recognition of her efforts. The gift box slipped from her numb fingers, hitting the floor with a hollow thud. Between one breath and the next, her perfect evening crumbled like ash. "About what?" The words barely escaped her throat. Taren's jaw clenched. "About us. About this." He gestured around their home, their sanctuary. "About what comes next."
Miles away, in the shadow of Blackthorn Fortress, Corvin stood at his chamber window watching the same moon that witnessed Maeve's world beginning to fracture. The wolf-carved mask in his hands felt heavier tonight, as though carved from lead instead of oak. His reflection stared back, half hidden, half monster. Scars twisted across the left side of his face like gnarled tree roots, a permanent reminder of trust betrayed. That night had taught him everything he needed to know about exposing vulnerability. Power was safer than love, fear more reliable than affection. "My lord?" His advisor's voice carried from the doorway. "The border scouts have returned." Corvin didn't turn. At the same time, his enhanced hearing caught whispers from the courtyard below, his subjects speaking in hushed tones about the masked king who ruled from shadows. They feared him. Good. Fear kept wolves alive. "Report." "Unrest in the northern territories. The smaller packs grow restless. They question your methods." Now Corvin did turn, his pale eyes reflecting moonlight like a predator's. "My methods keep them breathing. That should be gratitude enough." Because of that ruthless reputation, enemies thought twice before challenging his rule, which meant his people stayed safe, even if they didn't understand the protection his cruelty provided. Still, something felt different tonight. His wolf paced restlessly, responding to some distant disturbance. As if fate demanded it, his attention returned to the northern horizon, toward territories he'd claimed, but never truly cared to understand. What he didn't know was that his missing piece was about to be torn from everything she'd ever known, and thrown directly into his path.
The pack gathering buzzed with energy that made Maeve's skin crawl. Laughter echoed through the sacred grove where ancient oaks formed natural walls around their celebration circle. Bonfire light danced across familiar faces, faces that now felt like strangers evaluating her worth. She pressed closer to Taren's side, seeking comfort in his warmth. Yet instead of his usual protective arm around her waist, he stood rigid as stone. His attention focused on Elder Grimm's animated conversation with the other pack leaders, not on her. "Maeve!" Luna bounded over, her 3-year-old pup clinging to her legs like a burr. "Look what little Ash can do now!" The toddler shifted before Maeve's eyes, tiny fingers becoming claws, baby teeth sharpening to points. The transformation was clumsy, incomplete, but unmistakably powerful. Meanwhile, Maeve's heart clenched with familiar longing. "He's beautiful," she managed, her voice steady despite the knife twisting in her chest. "Isn't he? And at only 3. The pack's future is so bright." Luna's words carried innocent joy, but even so, they landed like physical blows. "When you and Taren have your first, I bet they'll be even stronger. Beta bloodlines always produce the most gifted—" "Excuse me." Maeve fled before Luna could finish, weaving between groups of chattering pack members. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape the constant reminders. Children played tag between the adults, their laughter sharp as glass. New mothers nursed babies while receiving congratulations. Pregnant females glowed with pride and purpose. Truth be told, Maeve felt like a ghost haunting her own life. "Beautiful night, isn't it?" Elder Grimm appeared beside her like smoke, his ancient eyes gleaming in the firelight. "Yes, Elder." She dipped her head respectfully, though her wolf bristled at his presence. "The moon goddess blesses us with such abundance." His gaze swept meaningfully over the families surrounding them. Fertile ground produces healthy trees, barren soil. He let the words hang like poison in the air. Her chest ached with each breath. "I'm sure the goddess has her reasons for everything." "Oh, she does indeed." Grimm's smile never reached his eyes. "Sometimes those reasons become clearer than we'd prefer. Don't you think, Beta Taren?" Maeve spun to find her mate standing behind them, his face unreadable. How long had he been listening? From there, the conversation took on an electric tension that made her wolf pace nervously. "The goddess's will reveals itself in time," Taren said carefully. "Indeed it does." Grimm's weathered hand landed on Taren's shoulder. "And wise leaders recognize when that time has come. The pack's future depends on difficult decisions." Before she could move, the elder melted back into the crowd, leaving her alone with Taren and a growing certainty that she'd missed something crucial. "What was that about?" she whispered. Taren's jaw worked silently. As the silence stretched, she felt the first real cracks forming in the foundation of her world. "Nothing you need to worry about tonight." But the way he said it, distant, cold, final, suggested tomorrow would bring very different concerns.
The morning hunt had provided little satisfaction. Corvin shifted back to human form in his private chambers, muscle and bone reshaping with practiced efficiency. His wolf remained agitated, prowling beneath his skin like a caged beast. Something was wrong in the northern territories. As if pulled by a string, he moved to the war room where maps covered every surface. Red pins marked reported conflicts. Blue indicated his patrol routes. Black marked territories that had gone silent. "Troubling news, my lord." Captain Thorne entered without ceremony, one of the few wolves brave enough to approach their king unannounced. Scouts report unusual activity along the crescent moon border. Corvin's attention sharpened. The crescent moon pack, traditional, insular, led by wolves who believed strength came only through bloodline purity. They'd never caused problems before, because they'd never been worth his attention. Define unusual. Political maneuvering, elder council meetings, whispers about purification rituals. With every heartbeat, Corvin's unease deepened. Purification typically meant exile or worse for wolves deemed unfit. His scarred fingers traced the border on the map, so close to his own territory that any refugees would likely stumble into his domain. "Double the border patrols," he commanded, and prepare the eastern watchtowers for potential guests. Thorn raised an eyebrow but didn't question orders. After 15 years of service, he'd learned that their king's instincts were rarely wrong. As the captain departed, Corvin found himself staring northward again. His wolf paced faster now, responding to some distant distress call he couldn't consciously hear. What he didn't realize was that his mate's world was about to shatter completely, and she would run straight into his arms.
The voices leaked through the cottage walls like poison gas, seeping into her very bones. Maeve pressed her ear to the kitchen window, her heart hammering against her ribs as Taren's words became clearer. "Can't continue this way, Grim. The pack is asking questions. Questions you're failing to answer decisively." Elder Grim's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. 3 years, Taren. 3 years without a single conception. Even the Omega pairs have produced offspring. Her breath caught in her throat. They were discussing her like livestock, evaluating her worth based on her womb's productivity. Still, she couldn't force herself to move away from the window. "She's my mate," Taren said, but his voice lacked conviction. The moon goddess makes mistakes." Grim's interruption was sharp as a blade. "Or perhaps she was testing your judgment. How long will you fail that test?" Shadows moved beyond the glass, and she glimpsed them standing near her herb garden, the plants she'd nurtured with such hope, believing they'd help her conceive. Now they seemed to mock her desperation. "What are you suggesting?" Taren's question came out strangled. "You know exactly what I'm suggesting. The pack laws are clear about barren females. Exile protects the bloodline from weakness." "No." The word screamed through her mind, but her voice refused to work. Her legs gave out, sending her sliding down the wall to the floor. Because of that overheard conversation, her worst fears crystallized into horrible reality. "There has to be another way," Taren whispered. "Is there? Your ambition to become Alpha requires pack support. How can they trust your leadership when you can't even manage your own household?" Grim's footsteps moved closer to the window. "The ceremony is tomorrow night. Announce the separation then. Clean, public, final. And if I refuse?" The silence that followed was answer enough. From there, Maeve understood that Taren's choice had already been made. Political survival outweighed whatever love he'd once felt for her. Her wolf whimpered deep inside, recognizing the betrayal before her human mind fully processed it. The mate bond that had once felt like warm sunlight now burned like acid in her veins. Footsteps approached the front door. Without thinking, she scrambled upstairs to their bedroom, diving under the covers and forcing her breathing to steady. When Taren entered minutes later, she kept her eyes closed and her body still. He stood beside the bed for a long time, and she wondered if he was memorizing her face, or perhaps calculating how to break her heart most efficiently. "I'm sorry," he whispered into the darkness, but not sorry enough to fight for her.
The scream echoed across the dark plains like a physical wound, jolting Corvin from his strategy session. Every wolf in the fortress felt it, that primal cry of agony that cut through pack bonds like silver through flesh. What in the void was that? Captain Thorn was already moving toward the windows. Corvin's enhanced senses reached outward, searching for the source. His wolf clawed at his consciousness, demanding they investigate immediately. The sound had come from the north, from Crescent Moon territory. "Prepare a patrol," he ordered, his voice deadly quiet. "Full combat gear." "My lord, that sounded like—" "I know what it sounded like. A mate bond being severed. The kind of spiritual violence that left permanent scars on both wolves involved. Someone just committed an act of cruelty that demands investigation." As if summoned by his words, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. The wind carried scents of fear, betrayal, and something else, something that made his wolf pace faster with protective instincts he'd thought long dead. What Corvin didn't yet understand was that the scream belonged to his future queen. And tomorrow night, she would need a king.
Anniversary morning arrived like an execution date. Maeve moved through her daily routines like a sleepwalker, tending her herbs, preparing breakfast, organizing the cottage. Each task felt surreal, as though she was performing for an audience that had already lost interest in her story. Taren avoided eye contact throughout their silent meal. Soon after, he left for patrol duty without his usual goodbye kiss. The absence of that small intimacy confirmed what her shattered heart already knew. Tonight, he would destroy her publicly. As the hours crawled past, she found herself standing before their bedroom mirror, studying her reflection with new eyes. Chestnut hair that Taren used to call beautiful. Green eyes he'd once claimed could calm his wildest moods. A body that had failed in its most basic feminine function. "What's wrong with me?" she whispered to her reflection. Her wolf stirred restlessly, as though trying to communicate something important. But whatever instincts her animal half possessed remained locked behind years of conditioning to be gentle, submissive, perfect. The cottage felt smaller today, like a trap disguised as sanctuary. More importantly, every corner held memories that would soon turn to poison. Their first morning together, the night he'd carried her over the threshold, quiet evenings by the fire, planning a future that would never exist. She pressed her palm to her stomach, imagining the children who would never quicken there. Despite that crushing certainty, she couldn't stop hoping for a miracle. By the time sunset painted the sky blood red, she'd made a decision. If tonight was to be her ending, she'd face it with whatever dignity remained. She'd wear her finest dress, the green one that matched her eyes. She'd walk into that ceremonial circle with her head high, because no matter how they broke her, she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. At least, not until she was alone.
The patrol returned with disturbing news. "Ceremony preparations, my lord," Scout Marcus reported, his young face grim. "The entire Crescent Moon Pack is gathering in their sacred grove, but the energy feels wrong." Corvin studied the map, his scarred fingers tracing territorial boundaries. Wrong how? Excited, like they're anticipating entertainment rather than celebration. His wolf's agitation spiked. Entertainment suggested spectacle, and spectacle in pack politics usually meant public humiliation or worse. The timing coincided too perfectly with yesterday's scream of anguish. "What kind of ceremony?" "Unknown, sir, but Elder Grimm was directing servants to prepare a judgment circle." Between one breath and the next, understanding crashed over Corvin like ice water. Judgment circles were used for pack trials, formal proceedings where wolves were stripped of rank, name, or pack membership entirely. Someone was about to be exiled, and every instinct he possessed screamed that the victim would be innocent. "Double the border patrols," he commanded. "Anyone fleeing Crescent Moon territory is to be brought directly to me, alive and unharmed." "Sir?" Marcus looked confused. "Exiles are typically abandoned to die." Corvin's voice carried absolute authority. "Not in my territory. Not tonight." As his men dispersed to carry out orders, Corvin found himself drawn to the northern windows again. Storm clouds massed on the horizon, and lightning flickered like angry spirits. His wolf pressed against his consciousness, demanding action. For the first time in years, Corvin considered removing his mask and riding out personally. Something precious was about to be cast into darkness, and darkness, as he knew better than most, was where kings were made.
The sacred grove hummed with anticipation that tasted like copper and lies. Maeve walked through the gathered pack members, her green dress rustling against her legs like whispered prayers. Torches cast dancing shadows across familiar faces, faces that now studied her with the hungry curiosity of spectators awaiting entertainment. "She looks beautiful tonight," someone murmured. "Shame about—" The voice cut off abruptly. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she took her place beside Taren in the ceremonial circle. Ancient stones formed a perfect ring around them, carved with symbols that spoke of judgment and justice. What followed was the slow realization that this wasn't their anniversary celebration. This was her trial. Elder Grimm stepped forward, his ceremonial robes billowing in the evening breeze. Pack members of Crescent Moon, we gather tonight to address a matter of grave importance to our bloodline's future. Taren's hand found hers, but his touch felt cold as winter stone. Still, she clung to that contact, desperate for any anchor in the storm about to break over her head. The moon goddess demands strength from her children, Grimm continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the grove. She demands fertility, prosperity, the continuation of pure bloodlines. Yet sometimes... His ancient eyes found Maeve's face. Sometimes we mistake our desires for her will. No. The word screamed through her mind, but her voice remained trapped in her throat. Beta Taren, Grimm's formal address made her blood freeze. You stand before your pack with a choice. Honor the goddess's true intentions or continue defying her wisdom. Instead of defending her, Taren stepped away. The space between them felt vast as an ocean, and just as cold. Taren's voice cracked. I call upon the pack's judgment regarding my mate bond. Gasps rippled through the crowd like stones thrown into still water. Because of that formal declaration, there would be no escape, no mercy, no last-minute reprieve. State your grievance, Grimm commanded. 3 years of union have produced no offspring. The bloodline suffers while weakness festers at its heart. Each word fell like a physical blow. I formally request dissolution of the mate bond and exile of the barren female who brings shame to our pack. The world tilted sideways. Her knees gave out, sending her crashing to the stone circle's edge. Blood welled from scraped palms, but that pain felt distant compared to the agony ripping through her chest. The request is noted, Grimm announced. Let the judgment begin.
The scream that split the night air hit Corvin like a physical assault, dropping him to one knee in his war room. Every glass surface in the fortress cracked simultaneously. Windows spider-webbed, mirrors shattered. His wolf clawed at his consciousness, desperate to reach whatever creature was suffering such torment. Because of that primal connection, he knew with absolute certainty that a mate bond was being severed, not through death or mutual consent, but through force and betrayal. My lord, Captain Thorne burst through the doors, his face pale with shock. The sound, ready my horse. Corvin's voice came out as a growl. Now. Sir, you can't possibly. Ready, my horse. Power rolled off him in waves, sending every wolf in the vicinity to their knees in submission. And summon the healers. We'll have a guest tonight. As if pulled by fate itself, he moved to his weapon's chest and selected his finest blade. Tonight called for steel and mercy in equal measure. Whatever wolves had committed this atrocity would answer for their cruelty. The wolf-carved mask felt heavier as he secured it over his scarred features. Soon after, he strode from the fortress like an avatar of vengeance, leaving destruction and terror in his wake. Storm clouds gathered overhead, as though the sky itself wept for the innocent soul being destroyed. But Corvin had learned long ago that kings were forged in darkness, and tonight he would claim what was his.
The brand burned like liquid fire against her shoulder blade, the sacred symbol of exile searing through skin and muscle to mark her very soul. Yet even so, that physical agony felt distant compared to the spiritual devastation ripping through her chest. By pack law and moon goddess mandate, Elder Grimm intoned as the iron cooled against her flesh. You are cast out from Crescent Moon territory. Your name is struck from our records. Your bloodline is deemed unworthy. Rough hands hauled her upright, pack guards she'd known since childhood now treating her like diseased vermin. The ceremonial bonds cut into her wrists as they dragged her toward the forest's edge. From there, her life became a nightmare of pain and betrayal. Please, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pack's approving murmurs. Taren. Her former mate stood in the circle's center, his face carved from stone. Instead of mercy, his expression held only relief, as though casting her out had lifted some terrible burden from his shoulders. The exile speaks no more, Grimm commanded. Let the wilderness judge her worth. They threw her beyond the territorial markers with such force that she tumbled down a rocky slope, stones tearing at her dress and skin. The exile brand throbbed with each heartbeat, a permanent reminder of her shame. Meanwhile, her wolf retreated so deep inside that she felt utterly alone in her own body. Behind her, the pack's celebration resumed as though nothing significant had occurred. Laughter echoed through the trees, joyous sounds that felt like mockery of her destroyed life. She lay where she'd fallen, staring up at the indifferent stars through a canopy of leaves. Blood seeped from dozens of cuts and scrapes. Her shoulders screamed with each breath. More importantly, the mate bond's severing had left a gaping wound in her soul that might never heal. "Why?" she asked the uncaring sky. But the moon goddess offered no answers, only cold light that illuminated her exile's beginning. Eventually, survival instincts forced her to move. The wildlands held predators both animal and supernatural. As a lone female with no pack protection, she represented easy prey for anything hungry enough to hunt. Stumbling deeper into unknown territory, she began the journey that would either kill her or transform her completely. The horse's hooves struck sparks from stone as Corvin raced through the night, his enhanced senses tracking the scent of blood and despair. What followed was a pursuit driven by instincts he'd thought long dead, protective urges that demanded he find and shelter whatever innocent creature had been cast into darkness. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the path ahead in stark black and white. His wolf pressed against his consciousness, urging greater speed despite the treacherous terrain. At the same time, rational thought whispered warnings about exposing himself for a stranger's sake. But rational thought held no power against the certainty blazing in his chest. She needed him. Whoever she was, wherever she'd come from, she needed him more than anyone had ever needed anything. The scent trail led northeast toward the disputed territories between packlands, wild spaces where exiles traditionally went to die. Because of that grim knowledge, he pushed his mount harder, racing against time and the elements. Thunder rolled overhead like the footsteps of angry gods. Rain began to fall in fat droplets that tasted of sorrow and lost hope. Still, he rode on, following instincts older than civilization. His scarred face remained hidden behind the wolf mask, but beneath that protection, his eyes blazed with purpose. Kings protected the innocent. Kings sheltered the broken. And tonight, he would prove himself worthy of his crown. The storm hit like divine punishment, transforming the forest into a waterlogged nightmare of mud and chaos. Rain hammered through the canopy with enough force to strip leaves from branches. What's worse, her thin dress provided no protection against the driving wind that cut through fabric like ice-edged blades. She stumbled through the darkness, her bare feet sliding on treacherous ground. The exile brand had swollen to twice its normal size, weeping blood and clear fluid that mixed with rainwater to create pink streams down her back. Despite that agony, she forced herself to keep moving. Stopping meant dying. And despite everything, she wasn't ready to surrender. "Help me," she whispered to any deity willing to listen. "Please, someone help me." Lightning illuminated the path ahead for split seconds, just long enough to reveal massive trees, jagged rocks, and the growing certainty that she was utterly lost. Her wolf remained buried so deep inside that her supernatural senses had dimmed to barely human levels. A branch caught her dress, tearing the expensive fabric from shoulder to hem. The sound reminded her of her life ripping apart in that ceremonial circle. Between one breath and the next, rage flooded through her, hot and clean and wonderfully clarifying. They'd thrown her away like garbage. Taren had betrayed their bond for political advancement. The pack had watched her destruction with entertainment rather than horror. "Damn them all!" she snarled into the storm. Thunder answered with approval, but rage provided only temporary strength. Soon enough, exhaustion began winning its war against determination. Her steps grew clumsy, her breathing labored. Blood loss and shock were taking their toll. She collapsed beside a massive oak, pressing her back against its solid trunk. From there, the world began spinning like a child's top knocked off balance. "Not like this," she whispered. "I won't die like this." But the storm showed no mercy, and darkness crept in from the edges of her vision.
He found her unconscious beneath the ancient oak, her body curled into a protective ball against the tree's base. Rain had plastered her dark hair to her skull and turned her torn dress transparent. Blood seeped from a fresh brand on her shoulder. The crescent moon symbol of exile burned deep into her pale skin. His wolf howled with protective fury. Without hesitation, he dismounted and gathered her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, as though grief had hollowed out her bones. Still, when he lifted her against his chest, she stirred slightly. "Please," she whispered without opening her eyes, "don't hurt me anymore." The broken plea hit him like a physical blow. As if summoned by her words, rage blazed through his veins, not at her but at whoever had reduced this woman to such desperate fear. "Easy," he murmured, his voice gentling despite the fury consuming him. "You're safe now, I promise." Her eyes fluttered open, the most beautiful green he'd ever seen, even dulled by pain and shock. For a moment, she studied his masked face with confusion rather than terror. "Are you real?" she asked. "Real enough." He settled her more securely in his arms, noting how naturally she fit against his chest. "What's your name?" She blinked slowly, as though struggling to remember. "I don't have one anymore. They took it away." The casual cruelty of that statement made him want to hunt down her tormentors and introduce them to creative forms of suffering. Instead, he focused on getting her to safety. "Everyone has a name," he said firmly. "We'll figure yours out later." As he carried her toward his waiting horse, lightning illuminated her face clearly for the first time. What he saw there, beneath the pain and betrayal, was strength. Not broken, just bent. Not destroyed, just tested. This woman was going to be magnificent once she remembered how to fight. And he was going to help her remember.
Consciousness returned like swimming up from the bottom of a deep, dark lake. Her body felt weightless, wrapped in softness that whispered against her skin like silk clouds. What followed was the gradual awareness that she was alive, a fact that surprised her more than it should have. The exile brand throbbed with each heartbeat, but the pain felt distant now, muffled by whatever healing salve had been applied to the wound. Instead of agony, she experienced a strange, floating sensation that made her wonder if she died and somehow earned a place in the moon goddess's mercy. "You're awake." The voice carried authority wrapped in velvet, masculine and oddly comforting. She forced her eyes open, blinking against golden lamplight that seemed impossibly warm after so much cold darkness. The chamber surrounding her was unlike anything she'd ever seen. Stone walls hung with rich tapestries, furniture carved from dark wood that gleamed like captured starlight, windows tall enough for giants. This wasn't a cottage or even a pack house. This was a fortress. "Where am I?" Her voice came out as a whisper, throat raw from screaming and rain. "Blackthorn Fortress, the Dark Plains." He stepped into her line of sight, and her breath caught despite her weakness. The wolf mask was carved from pale wood, its surface smooth as polished bone. Eye holes revealed glimpses of pale fire, predator eyes that should have terrified her. Yet even so, she felt no fear looking at this strange savior. "You're the Alpha King," she breathed, recognition hitting like lightning. "Corvin Blackthorn. And you are?" The question landed like a physical blow. She tried to speak her name, but the words tangled in her throat. Because of that brand on her shoulder, she had no name anymore, no identity, no worth. Tears threatened, hot and shameful. They took it away. Something shifted in his posture, a subtle tension that suggested carefully controlled violence. "Names can't be taken, only hidden for a while." Before she could respond, a woman entered carrying a steaming bowl that smelled of herbs and honey. She wore simple clothes but moved with confidence that spoke of high rank. "Ah, our guest is finally awake." The woman's smile was genuine, lacking the calculation Maeve had grown accustomed to seeing. "I'm Elena, the king's chief healer. How are you feeling?" like I've been trampled by a herd of elk. The honest answer surprised them all, including herself. Elena laughed, a sound bright as silver bells. Truthful. I like that. Drink this. She held out the bowl. It'll help with the pain and start repairing the damage those monsters did to you. Monsters. The casual way she said it suggested that exile brands were viewed differently here than in traditional packs. From there, hope began stirring in her chest like the first green shoots of spring. The Dark Plains doesn't recognize exile marks, Corvin explained, as though reading her thoughts. Strength comes in many forms. Sometimes the wolves cast out are the ones their packs can't afford to lose.
She was even more beautiful awake than unconscious, a realization that caught him off guard with its intensity. Her green eyes held depths that spoke of intelligence and spirit, even dulled by recent trauma. What's more, she'd answered Elena's question with refreshing honesty, rather than practiced politeness. Most wolves in her position would have groveled, begged for mercy, promised servitude in exchange for sanctuary. Instead, she'd made a joke about elk trampling. The unexpected humor suggested resilience that her former pack had been too blind to recognize. "I should thank you," she said after drinking Elena's concoction. "You saved my life." Anyone would have done the same. No. Her voice carried absolute certainty. They wouldn't have. Most would have left me to die, rather than risk harboring an exile. The casual way she accepted that harsh truth made his chest tighten with unfamiliar emotion. How many times had she been abandoned before the final betrayal? How many small cruelties had taught her to expect nothing from others? "Their loss," he said simply. She studied his masked face with curiosity rather than fear. Another surprise. Most wolves couldn't look directly at him for more than a few seconds before instinct forced them to submit or flee. "Why do you wear it?" she asked. "The mask." Elena made a soft sound of alarm. "You can't just... It's fine." Corvin raised a hand to silence his healer's protests. Then, to the woman who'd somehow earned the right to ask forbidden questions. "Some scars are too honest for politics." Understanding flickered in those remarkable green eyes. Not pity, thank the goddess, but recognition. She knew something about hiding painful truths from the world. "I understand," she said quietly, and somehow, impossibly, he believed she did.
3 days in Blackthorn Fortress felt like stepping into another world entirely. The servants treated her with respect that bordered on reverence, despite the exile brand marking her as worthless. What followed was a gradual understanding that the Dark Plains operated by different rules than any pack she'd known. "Strength isn't just about fighting," Elena explained as she changed the bandages on Maeve's shoulder. "Our king values intelligence, loyalty, courage in all its forms. Some of his most trusted advisors were exiles from other territories." "Including you?" The question slipped out before Maeve could stop it. Elena's hands stilled for a moment. "Cast out for practicing healing magic instead of battle techniques. My birth pack considered medical knowledge unfeminine. And here? Here. I'm the reason half the court survives winter." Elena's smile was fierce with pride. The king sees value where others see weakness. That afternoon, Corvin appeared with an offer that made her head spin. "Walk with me," he said, extending an arm like a gentleman from the old stories. The fortress grounds were vast, filled with training yards where warriors practiced complex maneuvers. Yet even so, what struck her most was the diversity among them, wolves of different sizes, ages, and obvious origins working together with seamless coordination. "Where did they all come from?" she asked. "Everywhere. Exiles, orphans, second sons with no inheritance, daughters deemed unmarriageable." His voice carried warmth that the mask couldn't hide. "I give them purpose. They give me loyalty that can't be bought or broken." They paused beside a garden where herbs grew in neat rows. The sight made her chest ache with memory, her own abandoned plants, now probably withered without care. "You know about healing?" Corvin asked, noting her interest. "Some. I grew fertility herbs, hoping— She swallowed hard. Hoping they'd help me conceive. Elena could use an assistant, someone with gentle hands and plant knowledge. The offer hung between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. Because of that simple proposition, she glimpsed a future beyond mere survival, a life where her skills mattered more than her womb's productivity. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you being kind to me?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. As the silence stretched, tension built between them like storm clouds gathering. "Because kindness shouldn't be earned," he said finally. "It should be given freely to those who need it most."
She was transforming before his eyes like a flower unfurling after a hard winter. Each day brought more color to her cheeks, more strength to her voice, more glimpses of the remarkable woman hidden beneath trauma and conditioning. Watching her work with Elena in the healing chambers was a revelation. Her hands moved with intuitive grace, as though she'd been born to mend rather than break. More importantly, she asked intelligent questions and offered suggestions that impressed even his experienced healer. "She's gifted," Elena reported after their third day working together. "Natural instincts, extensive knowledge of herb lore, and a gentle touch that calms even the most fractious patients." "And her wolf?" he asked. Elena's expression grew troubled. "Still buried deep? The trauma of forced bond breaking. It can take months for the wolf to resurface, if it ever does." That night, he found her standing on the balcony outside her chambers, staring north toward the territory that had cast her out. Moonlight painted her in silver and shadow, highlighting the elegant curve of her neck and the stubborn set of her shoulders. "Missing home?" he asked softly. "Wondering if they even notice I'm gone?" Her laugh held no humor, probably celebrating their purified bloodline. "Their stupidity is my gain." She turned to look at him, and for a moment the space between them crackled with tension he couldn't name. Her green eyes reflected starlight like deep pools, and he found himself wondering what it would feel like to see that gaze soften with trust. "You keep saying things like that," she murmured, "as though I'm valuable." "You are." The words came out rougher than he'd intended. "You just haven't figured it out yet. And if I never do, then I'll keep reminding you until you believe it." Something shifted in her expression. Surprise, hope, and something warmer that made his chest tighten with unfamiliar longing. For the first time in years, his wolf stirred with more than protective instincts.
The attack came during the evening meal, swift and vicious as a striking snake. Maeve was returning from the herb gardens when shouts erupted from the main courtyard, followed by the distinctive ring of steel against steel. "Raiders!" someone screamed. "Eastern Gate!" Without thinking, she ran toward the sound instead of away from it. What followed was her first real test since arriving at Blackthorn, the choice between cowering in safety or standing with those who'd sheltered her. The courtyard had become a battlefield. Wolves in unfamiliar colors clashed with Corvin's guards, their movements too coordinated to be random bandits. This was a planned assault, designed to probe the fortress's defenses. She spotted Elena crouched behind an overturned cart, her healer's satchel clutched to her chest. Blood stained the woman's forehead where debris had struck her. "Elena!" Maeve darted across the open space, dodging between fighters to reach her friend's side. "What are you doing?" Elena gasped. "Get to safety. You're hurt." Maeve pressed her hands to the head wound, using techniques Elena had taught her to assess the damage. "Concussion, but not severe. Can you walk?" Before Elena could answer, a shadow fell across them. One of the raiders stood over their hiding spot, his sword raised for a killing blow. His eyes held the cold hunger of a wolf who enjoyed causing pain. "Two pretty birds in one place?" he sneered. "The Alpha King's whores, I'd wager." Rage flooded through Maeve like liquid fire. These weren't her people. She had no people anymore. But they'd shown her kindness when she'd expected nothing but death. Because of that debt, she couldn't simply cower while they were threatened. Her wolf stirred for the first time since the exile, responding to her protective fury with strength she'd forgotten she possessed. "Run," she told Elena quietly. "Maeve, no." But she was already moving, launching herself at the raider with desperate courage born of gratitude and grief. Her body moved on instincts she didn't understand, muscle memory of training she'd never received. The raider laughed at her pathetic human attack, right up until her fingernails extended into claws and raked across his throat.
He heard her battle cry from across the courtyard and felt his blood turn to ice. She was supposed to be safe in her chambers, not fighting trained killers with nothing but determination and bare hands. Yet even so, pride blazed through his fear when he saw her moving with fluid grace that spoke of awakening supernatural abilities. Her wolf was rising to protect what she'd claimed as hers. The raider she'd attacked stumbled backward, blood streaming from parallel gashes across his neck. Not fatal, but enough to convince him she was more dangerous than she appeared. "Impressive," Corvin said as he appeared behind the would-be killer. "But allow me." His blade took the raider's head in one clean stroke. Around them, the battle was winding down as his superior forces overwhelmed the attackers. Still, his attention remained focused on the woman who'd risked everything to defend his people. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his hands moving over her arms and shoulders with clinical efficiency. "No, but Elena—" "I'm fine," Elena called from her hiding spot, though she swayed slightly as she stood. "Thanks to our brave idiot here." "I'm not brave," Maeve protested. "I was terrified." "Courage isn't the absence of fear," Corvin said quietly. "It's acting despite fear for something more important than your own safety." The look she gave him was bright with surprise and something deeper, a recognition that sparked between them like flint striking steel. From there, he knew with absolute certainty that this woman was meant for greater things than exile and abandonment. She was meant to stand beside kings. The question was whether she'd ever believe it herself.
The War Council chamber hummed with tension thick enough to cut with a blade. Maps covered every surface, marked with red pins that told stories of increasing aggression along the borders. What followed was Maeve's first glimpse into the complex web of politics that governed Pack territories. 3 raids in 2 weeks, Captain Thorne reported, his weathered face grim. All coordinated, all testing different sections of our defenses. Corvin stood at the chamber's head, his masked face turned toward the largest map. Pattern analysis? They're probing for weaknesses. But there's something else. Thorne's gaze flickered to Maeve before returning to his king. The raiders have been asking questions about recent arrivals. Ice filled her veins. Because of that pointed observation, she understood that her presence had brought danger to the wolves who'd sheltered her. The exile brand on her shoulder suddenly felt like a target painted on everyone she cared about. "What kind of questions?" Corvin's voice carried deadly quiet. "Description of an exiled female, crescent moon markings. They're offering gold for information about her whereabouts." "Taren," she whispered, the name tasting like poison. "He's hunting me." The attention of every wolf in the room focused on her with laser intensity. Yet even so, Corvin's masked gaze remained steady and reassuring rather than accusatory. "Why would your former mate risk war to reclaim an exile?" he asked gently. Her mind raced through possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. "I don't know. Unless..." Understanding hit her like lightning. The bond. When they severed it, maybe something went wrong. Maybe he can't form a new one while I'm still alive. Elena stepped forward from her position near the wall. Forced bond breaking sometimes leaves spiritual scars. If the ritual was performed incorrectly, he'd be stuck, Corvin finished. Unable to mate again, unable to advance politically, unable to fulfill pack expectations. So he needs me dead. The words came out flat and emotionless. Not just gone, dead. Silence stretched through the chamber like a held breath. From there, she watched these wolves. Her wolves now, she realized with startling clarity, process the implications of harboring her. There's more, Thorne continued reluctantly. Our scouts report he's not working alone. The raids show coordination between multiple packs. Someone's organizing them. Elder Grimm, Maeve said with certainty. He orchestrated my exile. He won't let it fail now.
Watching her piece together the conspiracy against her life was like watching steel being forged in fire. Each revelation straightened her spine a little more, brought more color to her cheeks, awakened more of the formidable intelligence hidden beneath conditioning and trauma. This woman had been wasted on wolves too blind to recognize her worth. Recommendations? He asked his counsel, though his decision was already made. Give her back, suggested one of the younger advisors. Avoid the conflict entirely. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Every wolf present suddenly found the floor fascinating as Corvin's displeasure filled the space like winter fog. Anyone else have suggestions that don't involve betraying our principles? His voice could have carved ice. Double the patrols, Elena said firmly. Increase security around critical areas. Show them we're not intimidated by political games. War preparations, added Captain Thorne. If they want to fight, we give them one they'll remember. Corvin's attention returned to Maeve, who sat quietly processing the discussion swirling around her. When she finally spoke, her words surprised everyone. There's a third option, she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was suggesting. I could leave. Draw them away from here. The council erupted in protests, but Corvin's raised hand silenced them instantly. His pale eyes remained fixed on her face, searching for the truth behind her brave offer. And go where? He asked quietly. It doesn't matter. As long as I'm not here, you're all safe. No. The word came out harder than he'd intended. You're under my protection now. That doesn't end because cowards threaten violence. Something shifted in her expression. Surprise melting into gratitude, then deepening into something warmer that made his chest tighten with unfamiliar longing. Why? She whispered. Why risk everything for someone like me? The question hung between them like a challenge. Around the chamber, his advisors waited for an answer that would shape policy for years to come. Because someone like you is exactly what this kingdom needs, he said finally. The question is whether you're brave enough to claim what's yours.
The ritual chamber lay deep beneath Blackthorn Fortress, carved from living rock and lit by crystals that pulsed with their own inner fire. Ancient symbols covered every surface, wolf runes that spoke of power, transformation, and destiny written in stone older than memory. Are you certain about this? Elena asked for the third time, her healer's instincts warring with her friendship. Once we begin, there's no stopping the process. Maeve nodded, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird. My wolf has been buried too long. If Taren wants to hunt me, he should face what I really am. 3 days had passed since the War Council, 3 days of increasing pressure as more raiding parties tested their defenses. The time for hiding behind others' protection was ending. What followed would be her choice to embrace the power she'd never been allowed to explore. Corvin stood beside the altar, his masked face turned toward symbols that seemed to writhe in the crystal light. The awakening ritual is dangerous. Some wolves don't survive the forced transformation. Some wolves don't survive exile either. She managed a smile that felt stronger than it had any right to. But here I am. The pride in his posture was subtle but unmistakable. Over the past weeks, she'd caught him watching her with an intensity that made her skin warm and her pulse quicken. Tonight, that attention felt like fire against her consciousness. The blood price? He asked Elena. Freely given, willingly shared. Elena held up a ceremonial blade carved from moonstone. 1 drop from the king, 1 from the candidate, mixed with sacred oils and blessed by lunar fire. Maeve's breath caught. From the king, but that means creating a spiritual connection, Corvin finished quietly. Not a mate bond, but something deeper than mere alliance. The implications hung between them like electricity before a storm. Because of that blood sharing, they'd be linked in ways she didn't fully understand. Yet even so, the prospect felt right in ways that had nothing to do with logic. "I trust you," she said simply. The words seemed to hit him like physical blows. His hands clenched at his sides, and she caught a glimpse of something vulnerable beneath his controlled exterior. "Then let's begin." Elena began the invocation in the old tongue, words that resonated through the chamber like music from another world. The crystals pulsed brighter with each syllable, responding to power that predated pack politics and territorial disputes. When the moonstone blade pricked her palm, Maeve felt her wolf stir for the first time with eager anticipation rather than fearful retreat. The ancient creature had been waiting for this moment, waiting for permission to be everything she was meant to become. The moment their blood mingled on the altar, his world exploded into sensation. Her essence flooded through him like liquid starlight, courage wrapped in gentleness, strength disguised as softness, power that had been buried but never truly broken. Through the connection, he felt her wolf rising like dawn after the longest night. The creature was magnificent, larger than average, silver-touched, possessed of intelligence that bordered on supernatural. This was no ordinary pack member's wolf. This was royalty recognizing its birthright. "By the goddess," Elena breathed, her voice filled with awe. "She's Alpha-born." Maeve's body convulsed as power flooded through her, rewiring every cell and nerve ending. Her human consciousness fought the transformation at first, conditioned by years of suppression. Then acceptance came, and with it, a release of potential that shook the very foundations of the fortress. Light blazed from her skin, silver and gold intertwined like precious metals being forged into something new. Her wolf pressed forward eagerly now, ready to claim its place in the world after too long in exile. Through their blood connection, Corvin experienced every moment of her awakening. The pain as her bones stretched and strengthened. The ecstasy as supernatural senses exploded into clarity. The fierce joy as she finally became everything she was meant to be. When the light faded, she knelt on the altar gasping for breath, her eyes now shot through with veins of gold that marked her as Alpha-born. Power radiated from her like heat from a forge, impossible to ignore or deny. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice rougher than intended. She looked up at him with eyes that held depths of understanding that hadn't been there before. "Like I've been sleeping my whole life and just woke up." The smile that curved her lips was radiant with newfound confidence. Here was the woman who'd been hidden beneath years of conditioning, brilliant, powerful, and absolutely breathtaking. "What happens now?" she asked. Through their blood bond, he felt her curiosity, her determination, and beneath it all, a growing attraction that matched his own. The ritual had awakened more than just her wolf. "Now," he said quietly, "you discover what it means to be queen." The messenger arrived at dawn with news that turned her blood to ice water. She stood in Corvin's private study, still adjusting to the enhanced senses that made every sound sharper, every scent more distinct, every emotion more vivid than before. "3 packs have formally allied with Crescent Moon," Captain Thorne reported, his face grim as winter stone. "They're calling it a purification crusade, claiming the Dark Plains harbors corrupted bloodlines that threaten all werewolf purity." Her newfound confidence wavered like a candle in strong wind. Because of her presence here, Corvin's entire kingdom faced destruction. The awakening ritual that had given her such joy now felt like a curse she'd brought upon innocent wolves. "How many fighters?" Corvin asked, his masked face revealing nothing. "Combined? Nearly 800. They've set up camps along our eastern border, flying banners that call for your exile's head." "My exile," she whispered, the words cutting deeper than any blade. "They're going to war because of me." Elena stepped forward from her position by the window. "They're going to war because they're afraid. Your awakening last night? Every supernatural creature within 50 miles felt it. They know what you are now." "What am I?" The question came out strangled. Alpha-born, Corvin said quietly. Royal bloodline that supersedes their petty territorial claims. Your very existence challenges their right to rule. Understanding crashed over her like a cold wave. This wasn't about exile anymore, or even about Taren's political ambitions. This was about power, recognizing power, and the old guard's desperate attempt to maintain control. They can't let me live, she realized. Not now that I've awakened. I'm proof that their precious bloodline purity is meaningless. Exactly. Corvin moved to the war table, his hands tracing territorial boundaries with practiced efficiency. But that also means this was always inevitable. You awakening just forced their hand. Through their blood bond, she felt his calm determination, a steady presence that anchored her spiraling thoughts. Still, guilt gnawed at her consciousness like acid. I should go to them, she said suddenly. End this before it starts. The temperature in the room dropped noticeably. Corvin's pale eyes fixed on her face with laser intensity, and she felt his wolf rise to the surface like an apex predator scenting prey. Say that again, he said, his voice deadly quiet. I could... No. The word cracked through the air like a whip. You're mine now. My responsibility, my ally, my... He paused, seeming to struggle with words. Mine. And I don't surrender what's mine to wolves too cowardly to face the truth. The possessive claim should have offended her feminist sensibilities. Instead, it sent heat spiraling through her newly awakened senses, making her acutely aware of his presence in ways that had nothing to do with politics or protection. Then what do we do? She asked. His smile beneath the mask was sharp as winter wind. We remind them why kings rule from fortresses of black stone.
War was coming whether they wanted it or not. That much was clear from the intelligence reports flooding in throughout the day. 800 fighters represented the largest alliance formed against the Dark Plains in his 15-year reign. More importantly, their religious rhetoric would inspire fanatics willing to die for their cause. But watching Maeve process the threat against her life was like watching steel being tempered in dragon fire. Each challenge only seemed to strengthen her resolve, awakening more of the formidable queen he'd glimpsed in the ritual chamber. I want to help plan the defense, she announced during the evening strategy session. His advisors exchanged uncertain glances. Traditional pack hierarchies didn't include exiled females in military planning, regardless of their awakened status. What do you know about warfare? One of them asked, not unkindly. I know my enemies better than any of you. Her voice carried newfound authority that made every wolf in the room sit up straighter. I lived among them for 23 years. I know how they think, how they fight, what they value most. Thorn leaned forward with interest. Elaborate. They'll expect you to meet them in open battle, honor combat between traditional forces. That's how pack disputes have been settled for centuries. Her green eyes, now touched with gold, gleamed with strategic intelligence. But they're not fighting to win territory. They're fighting to destroy me specifically. Meaning? Corvin asked, though he was beginning to follow her logic. Meaning they'll sacrifice everything else to ensure I die. Even if it costs them the war, as long as I'm dead, they can claim victory. She moved to the map, her finger tracing possible approach routes. Which gives us an advantage they don't expect. How? Her smile was sharp as broken glass. Because I'm not going to hide behind walls while others die for my mistakes. I'm going to give them exactly what they want. A chance to kill me. Every wolf in the room erupted in protests, but Corvin raised a hand for silence. Through their blood bond, he could feel her determination, her courage, and beneath it all, a growing hunger for justice that matched his own. Explain your plan, he said quietly. What she outlined was audacious, dangerous, and brilliant in its simplicity. It would require perfect timing, absolute trust, and the kind of courage that legends were built upon. It was also their best chance of survival. When do we begin? He asked. Her answering smile could have melted winter itself.
The war room had become her second home over the past week, Maps and battle plans spread across every surface like prophecies written in ink and hope. Dawn light filtered through tall windows, painting everything in shades of gold that reminded her of Corvin's eyes behind his mask. Final positions confirmed, Captain Thorne reported, his weathered face betraying none of the anxiety she could scent in the air. Northern ridge secured, eastern passes fortified, southern watchtowers manned. Her finger traced the convergence point where enemy forces would meet, a valley that had seen countless battles throughout Pack history. What followed was the familiar tightness in her chest as she contemplated the lives that would be lost because of her existence. Casualty estimates? She asked quietly. Conservative? 200 of ours, 400 of theirs. Thorne's honesty was brutal, but necessary. Your plan minimizes our losses, but war is never clean. Through their blood bond, she felt Corvin's steady presence like an anchor in churning seas. He stood at the chamber's far end, consulting with Elena about field medical preparations. Even so, his attention remained partially focused on her, a constant warmth that had become as essential as breathing. Second thoughts? Elena asked, joining her at the tactical display. Every minute. Maeve managed a smile that felt more confident than she actually was. But doubt doesn't change necessity. The awakening changed you, Elena observed. Not just your wolf, but everything. You carry yourself differently now. It was true. The ritual had unlocked more than supernatural abilities. It had revealed the leader she'd always been, buried beneath years of conditioning to be small, quiet, accommodating. From there, she'd discovered reserves of strength and determination that even exile hadn't been able to crush. I'm tired of running, she admitted. Tired of letting others suffer for my existence. If they want to hunt me, they'll face what I've become. And what have you become? Before she could answer, Corvin approached with news that made her blood run cold. Intelligence update, he said grimly. They've added a fourth pack to their alliance. The count is now over 1,000 fighters led by... He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. Elder Grimm himself. The name hit her like a physical blow. The ancient wolf who'd orchestrated her exile now led a holy war to ensure her death. Because of that escalation, she understood that this conflict transcended mere territorial disputes. It had become a battle for the soul of werewolf society itself. He's using me as a symbol, she realized. Proof that the old ways are failing, that tradition must be defended with blood. Then we give him a symbol he'll never forget, Corvin said quietly. We show him what happens when tradition tries to destroy truth.
She was magnificent in her resolve. Every inch the queen she'd been born to become, even if it had taken exile and awakening to reveal her true nature. Watching her plan their defense with strategic brilliance that matched his own was like watching the sun rise after the longest winter night. Through their blood bond, he felt her fear for his people's safety, her guilt over the coming battle, and beneath it all, a growing determination that blazed like forge fire in her soul. This woman would move mountains to protect those she'd claimed as family. Personal protection detail? He asked, though he already knew her answer. Absolutely not. Her response was immediate and firm. I won't hide behind others while they die for my mistakes. It's not hiding. Yes, it is. She turned to face him fully, her gold-touched green eyes blazing with conviction. If I'm truly Alpha-born as you claim, then I lead from the front. That's what queens do. Around the war room, his advisors watched their exchange with fascination. None had ever seen him argue strategy with an equal, because none had ever been his equal until now. Queens also ensure the kingdom's continuity, he pointed out. Dead martyrs inspire songs, not victories. Then don't let me die. Her smile was sharp as winter starlight. You're supposed to be the legendary Alpha King. Prove it. The challenge hit him like lightning, awakening possessive instincts that had nothing to do with royal duty and everything to do with the woman she'd become. Through their bond, he felt her trust in his abilities, her confidence in their partnership, and something deeper that made his chest tight with unfamiliar longing. "Very well," he said quietly. "But we do this together. No heroic sacrifices, no noble gestures. We survive this, and we survive it as partners." "Partners," she agreed, and the word carried weight beyond mere military alliance. Captain Thorne cleared his throat diplomatically. "Perhaps we should review the signal protocols once more." But Corvin's attention remained fixed on the woman who'd somehow become the center of his world. Tomorrow would bring battle, blood, and the possibility that one or both of them might not survive to see another dawn. Tonight, he intended to tell her exactly what she'd come to mean to him. The private garden behind Corvin's chambers provided sanctuary from the controlled chaos of war preparations. Moonlight painted the herb beds silver, and night-blooming flowers released perfumes that reminded her of peaceful times before exile and awakening, and the weight of crowns she'd never asked to wear. "You should be resting," she said as Corvin joined her on the stone bench, his masked face turned toward stars that seemed brighter than usual. "So should you." His voice carried exhaustion that he'd hidden from his war council all day. "Tomorrow changes everything. Are you afraid?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Too personal, too intimate for a mere alliance between king and refugee. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. As the silence stretched between them, tension built like storm clouds gathering on a clear horizon. "Terrified," he admitted finally. "Not of dying. I made peace with that possibility years ago, but of failing you, of letting them destroy what should have been protected." His honesty hit her like physical warmth. Through their blood bond, she felt his fear for her safety, his determination to keep her alive, and beneath it all something deeper that made her pulse quicken and her breath catch. "Why does it matter so much?" she whispered. "I'm just an exile you found dying in the rain." "No." The word came out rough with suppressed emotion. "You're the woman who risked her life to protect Elena during the raid, the healer who stays up all night tending wounded soldiers, the strategist whose plans will save hundreds of lives tomorrow." He paused, seeming to struggle with words. "You're the queen this kingdom has been waiting for." Queen. The title still felt foreign on her tongue, like clothing tailored for someone else. Yet even so, she couldn't deny the truth of how it resonated in her awakened soul. "I don't know how to be a queen," she confessed. "Neither did I when I became king." His laugh held no humor. "Royal blood doesn't come with instruction manuals. We learn by trying, failing, and refusing to give up." Through their bond, she felt the weight of his responsibilities, the loneliness of command, the careful isolation he'd maintained to protect himself from betrayal. More importantly, she felt his growing need for partnership, for someone who could stand beside him as an equal rather than a subject. "Corvin?" Her voice came out softer than intended. "When this is over, what happens to us?" The question hung between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. Because of that shared blood, she felt his reaction, surprise, hope, and a surge of longing so intense it took her breath away. "What do you want to happen?" he asked quietly. Her question hit him like lightning striking dry kindling, igniting possibilities he'd thought buried forever beneath duty and isolation. Through their blood bond, he felt her curiosity, her growing attraction, and beneath it all, a longing that matched his own. She was asking about more than political alliances or military partnerships. She was asking about the tension that crackled between them whenever they were alone, the way her presence had become essential to his peace of mind, the growing certainty that she was meant to be more than just his protected ally. "I want—" He stopped, struggling with words that could reshape both their lives. "I want what I've never believed I deserved. A partner who sees past the scars and the crown to whatever man exists underneath." Her breath caught audibly. "And you think I could be that partner?" "I think you already are." The admission felt like stepping off a cliff, The question is whether you could love a king who rules from behind a mask. The silence that followed was filled with night sounds, wind through leaves, distant conversations from the fortress, the steady rhythm of guards changing posts. Yet even so, his entire world had narrowed to this garden, this moment, this woman whose answer would determine whether he faced tomorrow's battle with mere duty or with something infinitely more precious to protect. "Ask me again after we survive tomorrow," she said finally, but her voice carried warmth that made his chest tight with hope. "Is that a promise?" Her smile was radiant in the moonlight. "It's a guarantee." Without thinking, he reached up to touch the edge of his mask, the barrier he'd worn for so long that removing it felt like contemplating suicide. "Don't," she said gently, her hand covering his. "Not yet. When you're ready to show me your face, I want it to be because you trust me completely, not because war makes everything feel urgent." The understanding in her voice, the patience she offered despite the growing attraction between them, hit him harder than any declaration of love could have. This woman was going to be the death of him. Or perhaps she was going to be his salvation.
The pre-dawn darkness felt heavy with the weight of approaching destiny. She stood on the fortress's highest tower, watching enemy campfires dot the horizon like fallen stars. What followed was the familiar tightness in her chest as she contemplated the battle that would determine not just her fate, but the future of everyone she'd come to love. "Final count?" she asked, as Elena joined her at the battlement's edge. 1,200 fighters confirmed. They've brought siege engines, werewolves, and something else. Elena's voice trailed off uncertainly. "What?" "Ritual implements. Silver chains, binding circles, ceremonial blades." Elena's healer training made her sensitive to instruments of suffering. "They're not just planning to kill you, Maeve, they're planning to make it a spectacle." Ice filled her veins as understanding crashed over her. This wasn't meant to be a clean military execution. It was designed as a public demonstration of what happened to wolves who challenged traditional authority. "Elder Grimm wants to break me publicly," she realized. "Prove that awakened power means nothing against pack law and religious authority." Which is why the plan has to work perfectly. Corvin's voice came from behind them, steady and reassuring despite the magnitude of what they faced. No room for error, no margin for heroics. She turned to find him fully armored for the first time since she'd arrived at Blackthorn. The sight took her breath away. Black steel that seemed to absorb light, weapon harnesses that spoke of deadly efficiency, a presence that radiated lethal competence. This was the Alpha King in truth, not just title. "You look terrifying," she said, meaning it as a compliment. "Good. Terror is a useful tool in warfare." His pale eyes studied her own preparations, leather armor that allowed for transformation, weapons chosen for speed rather than strength, silver accessories that would burn any wolf who tried to bind her. "You look like a queen going to war." The title still felt foreign, but less so each time he used it. Because of that growing acceptance, she felt her awakened wolf stir with anticipation rather than fear. "Signal positions?" she asked. "Confirmed. Thorn has the western approach. Marcus controls the southern watchtowers. Elena manages field medical from the protected command post." His voice carried the calm authority of a leader who'd planned for every contingency. "You and I take the center, the killing ground where they'll expect to find their prize." Through their blood bond, she felt his determination, his protective instincts, and beneath it all, a growing certainty that today would forge them into something unbreakable or destroy them completely. "No matter what happens," she said quietly, "I want you to know that these have been the best weeks of my life. You gave me back myself when I thought I was nothing." His armored hand found hers, squeezing gently. "And you gave me something I thought was lost forever, hope for a future worth fighting for." The eastern sky began to lighten, painting clouds in shades of rose and gold. Soon after, war horns would sound, and the valley below would run red with blood spilled for pride and power and the right to define truth. But standing beside him on these battlements, watching dawn break over a kingdom she'd helped defend, Maeve felt more alive than she ever had in her former life of gentle servitude. Today, she would either die as a queen or live to claim her crown.
The moment before battle always felt suspended in crystal, time slowing to allow for final preparations, last words, the quiet acknowledgement that some warriors would not see another sunset. Watching Maeve transform from exiled refugee to battle-ready queen had been like witnessing a miracle in real time. Her posture spoke of newfound confidence, her movements flowed with supernatural grace, and her eyes held depths of determination that would have impressed legendary Alpha Kings. She was ready for this in ways that had nothing to do with martial training, and everything to do with the strength of spirit that exile had tested, but not broken. Signal flares are prepared, Captain Thorne reported as he joined them on the tower. Medical stations established, fallback positions secured, emergency evacuations ready if needed. They won't be needed, Maeve said with quiet certainty. We end this today. Through their blood bond, Corvin felt her resolve like forged steel, unbreakable, perfectly tempered, ready to cut through whatever opposition they faced. More importantly, he felt her trust in him, in their partnership, in the battle plan they'd crafted together. Enemy movement, Marcus called from his watchtower position. They're forming up for advance. The war had begun. Remember, Corvin said to Maeve as they prepared to descend to the killing ground, we survive this together. No matter how desperate things become, we trust each other and we trust the plan. Her smile was sharp as broken glass. Together, she agreed. And as they moved toward destiny, he found himself believing for the first time in years that the future might hold more than mere survival. It might actually hold happiness.
The first assault came like a tsunami of fangs and fury, crashing against Blackthorn's defenses with the weight of righteous conviction. From her position in the valley's center, Maeve watched 1,200 enemy warriors pour across the battlefield like a living avalanche of steel and hatred. Eastern flank holding, Thorne's voice crackled through the communication crystals. But they're testing our limits. Her enhanced senses cataloged every detail of the approaching storm. The acrid smell of silver weapons, the thunderous rhythm of war drums, the battle cries that spoke of wolves convinced they fought for divine purpose. What followed was the sickening realization that her careful plans were already beginning to fracture. They're not following predicted patterns, she called to Corvin, who stood 30 yards to her left in the formation they'd rehearsed. The werewolves are supposed to lead, but they're holding them back. Through their blood bond, she felt his sharp attention focusing on the tactical shift. Enemy forces were adapting faster than anticipated, showing intelligence that suggested better leadership than they'd credited Elder Grimm with possessing. New strategy, Corvin's voice carried across the battlefield with supernatural clarity. They want to capture you alive for their ritual. They're sacrificing tactical advantage for that goal. Understanding crashed over her like ice water. The carefully planned ambush points, the prepared killing fields, the signal coordinations, all of it became useless if the enemy prioritized her capture over military victory. Signal change to defensive formation 3, she commanded, her voice carrying newfound authority that surprised even her. But before the order could be relayed, the first wave hit their center line like a hammer blow. Silver spears flashed in morning sunlight, aimed not to kill but to wound and disable. Behind the initial assault, she glimpsed the specialized capture teams, wolves carrying nets woven with silver thread and binding runes. Maeve! Elena's warning came too late. A silver-weighted net sailed through the air, its trajectory calculated with deadly precision. She dodged left, feeling the metal mesh graze her shoulder as it passed. The brief contact sent fire racing through her nervous system, reminding her why silver was the traditional weakness of their kind. From there, the battle became a nightmare of pain and desperation, as wave after wave of attackers focused solely on bringing her down alive.
Watching them hunt her like prey while he fought his own battles was torture beyond anything physical combat could inflict. Through their blood bond, he felt every silver burn, every near miss, every moment of exhaustion as she pushed her newly awakened abilities to their limits. His own opponent seemed almost secondary to the desperate need to reach her side. Steel sang against steel as he carved through enemy ranks with mechanical efficiency, his attention split between immediate threats and the woman who'd become more precious than his own life. "She's tiring," he called to Captain Thorne during a brief lull in combat. "They're wearing her down deliberately." "Fall back to position 2, Thorne suggested, blood streaming from a gash across his forehead. "No, if we retreat they'll surround her completely." Corvin's mind raced through alternatives, each more desperate than the last. Signal for the reserve cavalry. We break their formation or lose everything. But even as he gave the order, a new horn sounded from the enemy ranks. Not the bronze war horns they'd been using, but something deeper and more ominous that made every wolf on the battlefield pause in recognition. Elder Grimm himself was taking the field. The ancient wolf appeared at the enemy formation's center, his ceremonial robes billowing despite the lack of wind. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge. Not the clean strength of alpha authority, but something darker that spoke of rituals best left unmentioned. "Maeve Thornwick." His voice carried across the valley with supernatural projection. "Face the judgment you have so long evaded." Through their bond, Corvin felt her reaction. Fear, yes, but also a blazing fury that had been building since her exile night. This was the wolf who'd orchestrated her destruction, who'd convinced her mate to betray their bond, who'd branded her with shame and cast her into darkness. "I'm no longer Maeve Thornwick," she called back, her voice carrying equal power. "I am Queen of the Dark Plains, and you will answer for your crimes." The declaration sent shockwaves through both armies. Enemy fighters hesitated, uncertain how to process an exile claiming royal authority. Meanwhile, Corvin's forces rallied with renewed vigor, inspired by their queen's defiance. But Grimm's laughter was like winter wind through dead leaves. "You are nothing but a barren female who seduced a scarred king. Today we cleanse that corruption from our bloodlines forever."
The silver cage materialized around her like a nightmare made manifest. Bars of pure metal that sang with binding runes, powered by Grimm's ancient magic and designed specifically to contain awakened wolves. Despite her best efforts to dodge the trap, exhaustion and blood loss had slowed her reflexes just enough. "No!" Corvin's roar echoed across the battlefield as the cage solidified, cutting off their blood bond connection like a severed artery. Sudden isolation hit her harder than any physical blow. For weeks, his presence had been a constant warmth in her consciousness. Now she felt utterly alone, trapped within silver walls that burned her skin with every breath. Magnificent. Elder Grimm approached the cage with the satisfaction of a hunter admiring his prize. The corruption reveals itself clearly now. Alpha power stolen through dark rituals, wielded by one unworthy of such gifts. "The only corruption here is your twisted interpretation of pack law," she snarled, though the silver's proximity made speaking difficult. Brave words from a barren failure. His ancient eyes gleamed with fanatic fervor. "But bravery cannot change biology. You were cast out for weakness, and weakness is what you remain." Around the cage, enemy forces formed protective circles while Grimm's acolytes began preparing ritual implements. Silver knives glinted in the sunlight, their blades etched with symbols that promised spiritual as well as physical destruction. Through the cage bars, she watched Corvin fighting like a berserker to reach her, cutting down anyone foolish enough to stand in his path. Yet even so, there were too many enemies between them and more arriving with each passing minute. "He cannot save you," Grimm observed, following her gaze. "The masked king fights well, but he is only one wolf against righteous multitudes. He's not alone." Her voice came out stronger than she felt. "This entire kingdom stands with him. This kingdom will fall today, along with its corrupted rulers." Grimm signaled to his acolytes, who began chanting in the old tongue. "But first, we cleanse the bloodlines of your poison." The ritual circle blazed to life around her cage, silver fire that made her wolf retreat deep inside her consciousness. Because of that supernatural flame, she felt her awakened powers beginning to ebb like tide retreating from shore. From there, true despair began creeping into her heart.
The sight of her trapped in silver fire sent him into a killing rage that transcended rational thought. His wolf clawed at his consciousness, demanding blood and vengeance, and the destruction of everything that threatened their mate. Mate. The word blazed through his mind with the force of revelation. Not just ally or partner or queen. Mate in the truest sense, chosen by heart and soul, rather than duty or convenience. All forces converge on the ritual circle, he commanded, his voice carrying across the battlefield with desperate authority. Everything we have, everything we are, focus on breaking that cage. But Grimm had planned well. The ritual circle was protected by the enemy's finest warriors, arranged in defensive formations that would cost hundreds of lives to break through. Meanwhile, the ceremony continued, silver fire growing brighter with each passing moment. Through their fading bond, he felt her strength ebbing as the ritual worked to strip away her awakened abilities. Soon she would be merely human again, vulnerable to whatever torments Grimm had planned. "Sir," Captain Thorne appeared at his side, blood-soaked but still fighting. "The reserves are engaged, but we're outnumbered 3-1. Without reinforcements. Then we make our own reinforcements." Corvin's hand moved to his mask, fingers tracing the carved wolf features that had hidden his face for 15 years. "Signal full retreat for all forces except the elite guard." "Sir? You heard me. Everyone falls back except the 20 best fighters. We're going to do something stupidly heroic." Thorne's weathered face showed understanding and approval in equal measure. "The kind of stupid that makes legends? The kind that saves queens?" Corvin's pale eyes fixed on the silver cage where Maeve fought to remain conscious. "Or dies trying." As his forces began their tactical withdrawal, he prepared for the desperate gamble that would either rescue the woman he loved or ensure they died together. Either outcome was preferable to living without her.
The silver fire burned through her veins like liquid agony, stripping away layers of awakened power with each pulse of Elder Grimm's ritual. Her wolf had retreated so deep that she could barely sense its presence, a fading whisper of what she'd briefly become. "Witness the fate of those who defy natural order," Grimm intoned to the gathered armies, his voice carrying supernatural projection that reached every corner of the valley. "Behold how quickly stolen power fades when confronted with righteous purpose." Around the ritual circle, enemy warriors watched with fanatic satisfaction as their spiritual leader demonstrated divine authority. Meanwhile, her own strength continued ebbing like blood from an opened vein. Through the silver cage's bars, she caught glimpses of Corvin's desperate advance. His elite guard fought with suicidal bravery, cutting through enemy ranks despite impossible odds. Yet even so, there were simply too many opponents between them. "He comes for you still," Grimm observed with cold amusement. "The scarred king refuses to accept reality. Perhaps watching your purification will teach him proper humility." "You're afraid of him," she realized through the haze of pain. "All this ceremony, all these soldiers, you're terrified of what he represents." "I fear nothing from a broken ruler who hides behind masks and shadows." "Then face him without your army. Prove your divine authority through personal combat rather than overwhelming numbers." Grimm's ancient features twisted with rage. I dare suggest you're a coward who uses religion to justify political ambition." Despite the silver's burning, her voice carried clearly across the battlefield. "If the moon goddess truly supports your cause, you need no mortal assistance." The challenge hung in the air like lightning before a storm. Because of that public accusation, Grimm faced a choice between maintaining his spiritual authority or appearing weak before the very wolves he'd convinced to follow him. "Foolish words from a dying exile," he snarled. "But perhaps you're right. Perhaps the goddess demands I demonstrate her power personally." He raised his staff, and the silver fire blazed higher. This time, instead of draining her abilities, it began burning into her very soul. seeking to destroy not just her power but her essential self. The pain was beyond description, beyond endurance. Her vision darkened at the edges as consciousness began fragmenting under the spiritual assault. From there, she faced the terrible certainty that she was about to die not as a queen, but as the worthless exile they'd always claimed her to be.
The moment Grimm's ritual shifted from containment to destruction, their blood bond connection screamed with agony that drove him to his knees. Through that fading link, he experienced every moment of her suffering, the silver fire consuming her awakened nature, the spiritual attack aimed at her very essence, the growing certainty that she was about to be erased completely. "No," he whispered. Then louder, "No." His wolf exploded outward with such force that every supernatural creature within a mile radius felt it. Raw, primal authority that spoke of ancient bloodlines and power that predated pack politics by millennia. The mask fell from nerveless fingers as he rose, revealing the scarred face he'd hidden for 15 years. Twisted flesh told stories of betrayal and survival, but his eyes blazed with purpose that transformed disfigurement into terrible beauty. "Grimm," his voice carried across the valley with supernatural force. "Face me, you cowardly bastard." The ritual faltered as every head turned toward the unmasked king. Gasps rippled through both armies as they beheld the scars that had become legend, proof of survival against impossible odds, badges of honor earned through suffering and strength. "The mask falls at last," Grimm called back, his voice holding satisfaction. "Now we see the broken king's true face, marked by weakness, scarred by failure, marked by truth." Corvin began walking toward the ritual circle, his remaining guard forming a protective wedge around him. "These scars were earned protecting innocence from wolves like you, predators who use faith to justify cruelty." "Then come." Grimm raised his staff higher, silver fire blazing like a fallen star. "Come and share your exile's fate." But as Corvin approached the circle's edge, something unprecedented occurred. The silver fire flickered, wavered, then began dimming as though confronted by a greater power. Because of their bond, his love for her had become a force that even ancient magic couldn't easily overcome. What Grimm didn't understand was that true love didn't follow the rules of ritual and religion, and tonight love was going to rewrite all the rules.
The silver fire flickered like a dying candle as something unprecedented began happening within the ritual circle. Through her pain-hazed consciousness, she felt the ancient magic wavering, not from weakness, but from encountering a force it couldn't comprehend or combat. Love. Pure, unwavering, soul-deep love that blazed through their blood bond like sunlight cutting through storm clouds. "Impossible!" Elder Grimm snarled, his weathered face twisting with rage as his carefully constructed ritual began unraveling. "The corruption fights back." "It's not corruption," she whispered, her voice gaining strength as Corvin's unmasked presence filled her awareness like warm honey. "It's truth, something you've forgotten in all your scheming and politics." Through the flickering silver bars, she watched him approach with his scarred face revealed to both armies. The gasps and murmurs from enemy ranks told her everything. These wolves had been fed stories about a broken, hidden king, not the magnificent warrior who strode toward them with purpose blazing in his pale eyes. The mask was never hiding weakness, she realized aloud, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet battlefield. It was protecting your enemies from seeing what you really are. Because of that understanding, her own strength began returning in waves. Not just her awakened abilities, but something deeper, the bone-deep certainty that she belonged exactly where she was, fighting beside exactly the right wolf. "You love him," Grimm accused, as though love itself was evidence of corruption. "With everything I am." Her admission rang across the valley like a bell tolling. "And he loves me. That's why your ritual is failing, because real love is stronger than artificial authority." The silver cage began dissolving as their bond reasserted itself, burning through ancient magic like acid through parchment. From there, she felt her wolf rising again, not just returning, but emerging more powerful than before. "Witness the true power of unity," she called to both armies as she stepped free from the crumbling prison. "This is what happens when wolves choose love over fear."
The moment she broke free from the silver cage, his world exploded back into brilliant clarity. Their blood bond reasserted itself with such force that he staggered, overwhelmed by the return of her presence in his consciousness. Through that connection, he felt her renewed strength, her blazing determination, and beneath it all, a love that matched his own in intensity and depth. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for their future, for the kingdom they could build together, for the love that had transformed them both. Impossible! Grim raised his staff higher, summoning silver fire that blazed like a miniature sun. Ancient magic cannot be broken by mere emotion. "Then you understand nothing about the forces that truly govern our kind," Corvin replied, his unmasked face showing the full intensity of his conviction. "Power isn't about domination or fear. It's about connection, trust, love freely given and received." Around the ritual circle, enemy warriors began shifting uneasily. The confident assault had become something else entirely, a battle between two completely different philosophies of leadership and strength. "You've ruled through terror," Maeve added, her voice carrying newfound authority that made even veteran fighters pause. "Making wolves smaller, weaker, more afraid. We rule through inspiration, helping our people become everything they're capable of being." "Pretty words," Grim snarled, "but words don't win wars." "No," Corvin agreed, his hand moving to the sword at his side. "But they do reveal which side fights for something worth dying for." Through their bond, he felt Maeve's readiness, her trust in his abilities, and her absolute confidence that they could face anything together. That certainty blazed through him like forge fire, burning away 15 years of careful isolation and defensive thinking. "Stand with us," he called to the enemy forces, his voice carrying across the valley with supernatural clarity. "Or stand aside, but understand that we will not yield to those who mistake cruelty for strength." Some of the enemy fighters began lowering their weapons, uncertainty flickering across faces that had been carved with fanatic certainty only minutes before. The tide was turning.
The first enemy warrior to switch sides was young, barely out of adolescence, with the lean build of a scout rather than a frontline fighter. He dropped his silver spear and stepped away from Grim's formation, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly tense battlefield. "I came here to defend pack purity," he announced, his words causing ripples of shock through both armies. "But there's nothing pure about torturing an innocent female for political gain." "Traitor!" Grim's voice cracked like a whip. "You forget your oaths." "I remember them perfectly." The young wolf's chin lifted with defiant pride. "I swore to protect the innocent and defend the weak. She's both." What followed was a moment of crystalline silence as every warrior present processed the implications. Then, like dominoes falling, more enemy fighters began laying down their weapons. "The ritual was supposed to prove divine authority," an older woman called from the enemy ranks. "But if the goddess truly supported this cause, why did it fail?" "Magic fails!" Grim shrieked, his ancient composure cracking under pressure. "Corruption undermines righteous purpose." "Or maybe," Maeve said gently, her voice carrying warmth that contrasted sharply with his rage, "the goddess never supported cruelty disguised as righteousness." Through her bond with Corvin, she felt his fierce pride in her words, his admiration for the way she turned philosophy into practical leadership. More importantly, she felt his growing certainty that they were witnessing the end of an era, the moment when the old ways of fear-based rule finally gave way to something better. "You speak of the goddess," she continued, addressing the wavering enemy forces directly. "But which goddess do you serve? The one who supposedly demands suffering and submission? Or the one who gifts us with strength, love, and the courage to protect what matters most?" "Blasphemy!" Grim raised his staff, silver fire blazing higher than ever. You corrupt their minds with honeyed lies. I offer them truth. Her voice remained steady despite the magical flames licking at her consciousness. The choice to serve love instead of fear, growth instead of stagnation, hope instead of despair. By now, nearly half the enemy forces had laid down their weapons. The remaining fighters looked uncertain, torn between ingrained loyalty and growing understanding that their cause might not be as righteous as they'd believed. Join us, Corvin added, his scarred face radiant with conviction. Help us build something better than endless cycles of dominance and submission.
Watching her transform former enemies into allies through pure force of moral clarity was like witnessing miracles in real time. She didn't threaten or cajole, she simply offered truth and let wolves make their own choices about whether to embrace it. This was what queens were meant to be, not rulers through fear, but leaders who inspired others to become their best selves. Enough! Grimm's roar echoed across the valley as he realized his army was dissolving around him. You want to see divine authority? Witness the power of purification. The ancient wolf began chanting in languages that predated pack civilization, words that made the air itself recoil in horror. Silver fire blazed higher, but this time it carried undertones of something darker, ritual magic that drew power from suffering and fed on spiritual corruption. He's summoning something. Elena's voice came through their communication crystal, tight with professional alarm. The magical signature is wrong, malevolent. Around the ritual circle, the remaining enemy forces began backing away as shadows gathered despite the bright morning sun. Whatever Grimm was calling forth, even his own followers recognized it as abomination. Blood magic, Maeve breathed, her enhanced senses cataloging the wrongness seeping into reality. He's willing to damn his own soul rather than admit he was wrong. Through their bond, Corvin felt her horror, not at the danger to herself, but at the realization that Grimm's fanaticism had driven him beyond mere cruelty into actual evil. Signal the retreat, he commanded his guard. Get everyone back from the circle. What about you? Captain Thorne asked, though his weathered face already showed he knew the answer. We end this. Corvin's pale eyes fixed on the woman who'd become his partner in all things. Together. She nodded, her gold-touched green gaze blazing with determination that matched his own. Whatever emerged from Grimm's ritual, they would face it as they'd faced everything else, united, unafraid, and absolutely committed to protecting the future they'd chosen to build. The real battle was just beginning.
The thing that crawled from Grimm's ritual circle defied description. Shadow given form, hatred made manifest, a writhing mass of spiritual corruption that hurt to look at directly. Its presence made reality itself recoil, causing flowers to wither and healthy wolves to stagger backward in instinctive revulsion. Behold divine judgment! Grimm's voice had changed, carrying harmonics that suggested the creature was speaking through him rather than with him. Witness the fate of those who defy natural order! The abomination turned its attention toward her and Corvin, malevolent intelligence blazing in eyes that held depths of endless hunger. This wasn't just a weapon. It was a spiritual parasite that fed on love, hope, and everything pure in the world. It's designed to destroy bonds, she realized with growing horror. Not just between us, but between everyone who's chosen to stand with us. Through their blood connection, she felt Corvin's grim understanding. The creature would corrupt their love, turn it into possession and jealousy and eventual hatred. Then it would spread to every relationship in their kingdom, rotting the foundations of everything they'd built. Can't let it touch us, he said grimly, his sword blazing with silver fire as he prepared for battle against an enemy that couldn't be killed through conventional means. No. Her voice carried sudden conviction. We can't fight it, we have to overwhelm it. What? Around them, the abomination began advancing with predatory grace, leaving trails of spiritual corruption in its wake. Where its influence touched, loyal soldiers began eyeing each other with suspicion and growing hostility. It feeds on negative emotions, she explained rapidly. Hatred, fear, jealousy, despair. But what happens if we give it the opposite? Understanding blazed in his pale eyes. It starves. More than that. She reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining as the creature bore down upon them. Our love created something it can't understand or combat. If we can project that feeling to everyone here, we turn the entire battlefield into hostile territory for corruption itself. Through their bond, she felt his absolute trust in her plan, his willingness to risk everything on her insight. More importantly, she felt his love blazing like forge fire, not desperate or possessive, but clean and strong and utterly transformative. Together? She asked. Always. They opened their bond completely, letting the love between them flow outward like light-piercing darkness. What followed was the expanding wave of warmth that touched every consciousness on the battlefield, former enemies and loyal allies alike.
The moment they released their combined emotional force, the world transformed around them. Warriors who'd been snarling at each other seconds before suddenly remembered why they'd become friends. Former enemies looked at their weapons with confusion, wondering why they'd been so eager to cause harm. Most importantly, the creature of corruption began writhing in apparent agony as it encountered an environment completely hostile to its nature. "Impossible!" Grimm shrieked, his voice cracking as the ritual backlash began tearing through his consciousness. "Love is weakness. Connection is vulnerability." "Connection is strength," Maeve replied, her voice carrying across the battlefield with supernatural clarity. "Love is power that multiplies instead of diminishing when shared." The abomination was dissolving now, its form losing coherence as positive emotions flooded the area. Without hatred and fear to sustain it, the creature simply couldn't maintain existence in reality. "This is what we offer," Corvin called to the assembled wolves, his unmasked face radiant with purpose. "Not domination or submission, but partnership. Not fear-based loyalty, but love freely given and received." Around the ritual circle, even Grimm's most fanatical followers were laying down their weapons. The combination of the creature's destruction and the emotional wave washing over them had shattered whatever hold he'd maintained over their minds. "Choose," Maeve added gently. "Help us build something better, or go home to your families and try to forget this day. But understand that the old ways of ruling through terror and division end here." Through their bond, he felt her exhaustion. The effort of projecting such powerful positive emotions had drained her reserves completely. Yet even so, she stood tall beside him, every inch the queen she'd been born to become. "It's over," he said quietly, meant for her ears alone. "No." Her smile was radiant despite her fatigue. "It's just beginning." And as he looked around the battlefield, at former enemies embracing, at his own people tending wounded regardless of which side they'd originally fought for, at the future spreading before them like dawn breaking over mountains, he realized she was absolutely right. They'd won more than a battle. They'd won the right to redefine what it meant to lead, to love, and to build something worth protecting. The real work was just beginning.
Elder Grimm stood alone in the center of his collapsed ritual circle, the silver fire reduced to flickering embers around his feet. The ancient wolf's weathered face twisted with rage and disbelief as he surveyed the battlefield where his holy war had transformed into something resembling a peace gathering. "This changes nothing," he snarled, his voice hoarse from channeling corrupted magic. "You may have bewitched these weak-minded fools, but the old bloodlines remember their duty." Taren stepped from behind his elder's robes, and her heart clenched with familiar pain. Her former mate looked older than his years, hollowed out by whatever spiritual damage the forced bond-breaking had inflicted upon his soul. "Hello, Maeve." His voice carried exhaustion rather than hatred. "You look different." "I am different." She moved closer, feeling Corvin's steady presence at her back like an anchor in churning seas. "The question is whether you're ready to accept that change." Through their bond, she felt Corvin's tension, not jealousy, but concern for her emotional well-being. He understood that this confrontation represented more than political maneuvering. This was her chance to close the circle of her transformation, to face the wolf who'd tried to destroy her from a position of strength rather than victimhood. The bond breaking failed, Taren said quietly. I can't form new connections, can't advance in the pack hierarchy, can't become anything more than what I was when I betrayed you. And whose fault is that? Her voice remained steady despite the memories threatening to surface. You chose ambition over love, politics over partnership. The consequences are yours to bear. Elder Grimm raised his staff with trembling hands. Enough sentiment. The exile will die as the moon goddess demands, and order will be restored. But when he tried to summon silver fire, nothing happened. The corrupted magic had burned through his spiritual reserves, leaving him as powerless as any mortal wolf. Your goddess abandoned you the moment you chose hatred over healing, she said gently. But mine offers redemption to those brave enough to seek it.
Watching her offer mercy to wolves who tortured and exiled her was like witnessing the birth of legends. Through their bond, he felt her pain at seeing Taren's spiritual damage, her pity for Grimm's self-inflicted corruption, and beneath it all, a compassion that humbled him with its depth. This was why she'd been born to rule, not because of bloodline or awakened power, but because she possessed the strength to forgive without forgetting, to heal without enabling, to lead through inspiration rather than intimidation. The offer stands for everyone, she continued, addressing both Grimm and Taren directly. Return to your territories. Try to rebuild what you've damaged. But understand that the old ways of ruling through fear and division will find no welcome in our kingdom. Our kingdom? Grimm's voice cracked with disbelief. You claim sovereignty over territories you've never seen? I claim partnership with a king who rules through love rather than terror. Her hand found Corvin's, their fingers intertwining naturally. Together we offer an alternative to the cycles of dominance and submission that have kept our people small and afraid. You offer chaos, Taren said, but his voice lacked conviction. Without clear hierarchies, without traditional authority, packs will tear themselves apart. We offer evolution. Corvin stepped forward, his unmasked face radiant with purpose. The chance to become something greater than what we've always been. Around the ritual circle, hundreds of wolves watched this exchange with fascination. Former enemies stood beside former allies, united by the emotional transformation they'd all experienced. What followed was a moment of crystalline possibility, the chance for an entire generation to choose love over fear. I can't, Grimm whispered, his ancient frame shaking with exhaustion and spiritual depletion. I've spent too many years believing in the old ways. They're all I have left. Then go home, Maeve said with infinite gentleness. Spend your remaining years in peace, rather than spreading poison. The broken elder turned and walked away, supported by the few followers who remained loyal despite everything. His departure felt like winter finally giving way to spring. But Taren remained, his hollow eyes fixed on the woman he'd tried to destroy. I'm sorry, he said finally, for everything. Through their bond, Corvin felt Maeve's careful consideration of those words, testing them for sincerity, weighing them against years of pain and betrayal. I forgive you, she said at last. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. The bond breaking left you spiritually damaged because you acted against love itself. That's not my curse. It's natural law. Understanding flickered in Taren's eyes. And there's no way to repair the damage? There's always a way, she said gently. But it requires choosing love over ambition, service over dominance, healing over hurting. Are you capable of that growth? The question hung between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. Around the battlefield, hundreds of wolves waited to see whether redemption was truly possible for those who'd fallen furthest. Taren's answer would determine whether this victory led to lasting peace or merely postponed the next conflict.
I don't know, Taren admitted, his voice carrying honesty that had been absent during their entire marriage. I've spent so long pursuing power that I've forgotten what it feels like to simply serve. The admission rippled through the assembled wolves like stones thrown into still water. Because of that vulnerable confession, she saw possibilities for healing that went far beyond personal reconciliation. "Then learn," she said simply. "Help your pack rebuild without the poison of superiority and fear. Protect the vulnerable instead of exploiting them. Choose cooperation over competition. And if I fail, then you fail honestly, which is still better than succeeding through cruelty." Her voice carried warmth that seemed to ease some of the spiritual damage ravaging his features. "But I don't think you'll fail. The wolf I once loved is still in there somewhere, buried under years of ambition, but not destroyed." Through her bond with Corvin, she felt his pride in her wisdom, his admiration for the way she offered hope without naivety. More importantly, she felt his absolute trust in her judgment, even when that judgment involved showing mercy to wolves who'd tried to destroy them both. "What about the traditional alliances?" one of the former enemy commanders asked, stepping forward with respectful caution. "The pacts and treaties that bind our territories?" "We honor agreements based on mutual benefit and respect," Corvin replied, his scarred face open and honest. "But any treaty that requires oppression or exploitation ends today. And those who refuse the new terms are free to isolate themselves until they're ready for better relationships." Maeve's voice carried gentle firmness. "We won't force change on unwilling participants, but we also won't enable continued harm." What followed was a complex discussion involving dozens of pack representatives, as wolves who'd arrived for war found themselves negotiating the foundations of lasting peace, trade agreements that benefited all parties, defense pacts that protected the weak without empowering bullies, cultural exchanges that celebrated diversity rather than demanding conformity. "This will take years to fully implement," Captain Thorne observed during a brief lull in negotiations. "All worthwhile changes take time," she agreed. "But we're not trying to create perfection overnight, just improvement, one choice at a time."
Watching her facilitate discussions between former enemies was like witnessing diplomacy elevated to art form. She listened more than she spoke, asked questions that revealed hidden assumptions, and consistently redirected conversations away from zero-sum thinking toward collaborative solutions. This was what leadership looked like when stripped of ego and fear. Simple, honest, focused on genuine service rather than personal aggrandizement. "The coronation?" Elena asked during a private moment while Maeve coordinated territorial boundary discussions. "When do we formalize what everyone already recognizes?" He'd been wondering the same thing. Through their bond, he felt Maeve's growing comfort with authority, her increasing confidence in making decisions that affected thousands of lives. She was ready to be queen in name, as well as deed. "Soon," he said quietly. "But first, we need to ensure the kingdom is stable enough to celebrate rather than merely survive." "And the mask?" His hand moved unconsciously toward his scarred face. After 15 years of hiding behind carved wood, exposure still felt vulnerable in ways that had nothing to do with physical appearance. "She's seen the worst of me and chosen to stay," he said finally. "That's worth more than any amount of careful concealment." Elena's smile was bright with genuine happiness. "The healers have a saying, scars tell stories of survival, not defeat. Your face tells the story of a king who protects his people no matter the cost." Through their bond, he felt Maeve's attention turn toward him despite her involvement in complex negotiations. Even focused on matters of state, part of her consciousness remained attuned to his emotional well-being. That kind of partnership, where two people could work independently while remaining connected, was what he'd dreamed of during long years of isolation. Not the loss of self that characterized unhealthy relationships, but the multiplication of strength that came from genuine unity. "My lord?" A young scout approached with the respectful caution of someone bearing important news. "Message from the capital. The Southern Territories are requesting formal alliance discussions." Word was spreading faster than they'd anticipated. Within hours, their victory over fear-based leadership was inspiring change across the werewolf world. "Send diplomatic envoys," he commanded. "Full honors, but make it clear that any alliance requires commitment to our principles of mutual respect and cooperative growth." As the scout departed, he caught Maeve's eye across the crowd of negotiating wolves. Her smile was radiant with shared purpose and deep affection, the expression of a woman who'd found her perfect partner in life's most important work. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but they would face them together.
6 months later, the great hall of Blackthorn Fortress blazed with golden light from 1,000 candles, their flames reflecting off polished stone and rich tapestries that told stories of transformation and hope. Representatives from dozen territories filled the space, wolves who'd come not as conquerors or supplicants, but as partners in building something unprecedented. "Are you ready?" Elena asked, as she made final adjustments to the ceremonial crown that felt both foreign and perfectly natural atop Maeve's head. "As ready as anyone can be for becoming legendary," she replied, managing to keep her voice steady despite the magnitude of what was about to occur. Through the great hall's windows, she could see the kingdom they'd built together, prosperous, diverse, filled with wolves who'd learned to measure strength through cooperation rather than domination. Former exiles worked alongside traditional pack members. Healers held equal status with warriors. Children played together regardless of their parents' origins or abilities. "The transformation is remarkable," Elena observed, following her gaze. 6 months ago, most of these wolves were trying to kill each other. Now they're planning trade delegations and cultural festivals. "Love is a powerful teacher," she said simply. The great doors opened and Corvin entered wearing ceremonial armor that gleamed like captured starlight. His face, scarred but radiant with purpose, was fully visible to the assembled crowd. After months of public appearances, he'd grown comfortable with exposure that had once seemed impossible. Through their bond, she felt his pride in what they'd accomplished together, his deep love for the woman she'd become, and his absolute confidence in their shared future. "My queen," he said formally, though his eyes held warmth that made her pulse quicken. "My king," she replied, taking his offered arm. Together, they walked toward the dais where representatives from across the werewolf world waited to witness history being made. What followed was not just a coronation, but a ceremony recognizing the birth of entirely new forms of leadership and governance. "Do you, Maeve of the Dark Plains, accept the responsibility of ruling through service rather than dominance?" The ancient words had been rewritten to reflect their revolutionary approach to power. "I do," she said clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "Do you pledge to lead through love rather than fear, to inspire growth rather than demand submission, to protect the vulnerable while empowering the strong?" "I do."
The moment the crown settled on her head, every wolf in the great hall felt it, a shift in the fundamental forces that governed their world. Not the brutal dominance of traditional alpha authority, but something gentler and infinitely more powerful. Through their bond, he experienced her complete acceptance of the role she'd been born to fill. Not just queen of the Dark Plains, but symbol of what werewolf leadership could become when stripped of ego and fear. "By the authority vested in me by the moon goddess herself," the high priestess intoned, her voice carrying supernatural resonance. "I name you Queen Maeve, sovereign of the Dark Plains, protector of the innocent, guardian of growth." The cheers that erupted shook the fortress foundations, not just celebration but recognition of hope made manifest. These wolves had witnessed transformation that most would have considered impossible. Exile becoming royalty, fear giving way to love, division healing into unity. "What comes next?" she asked quietly as the formal ceremony concluded and celebration began. "Everything," he replied, his scarred face radiant with possibility. "Treaties to negotiate, territories to explore, children to raise, legends to live." Through their bond, he felt her reaction to that last item, a flutter of excitement mixed with deep contentment. They discussed the future in abstract terms, but tonight felt like the moment when abstract became concrete. "Children?" she asked, her voice soft with wonder. "If you want them, when you're ready. There's no pressure, no timeline except what feels right to us." Her smile could have melted winter itself. "I used to think my worth was tied to my ability to bear children. Now I know my worth comes from what I choose to build, create, and protect. And yet, the idea of raising little wolves who'll never doubt their value, never question their right to love and be loved." She paused, her eyes bright with unshed tears of joy. "That sounds like the most beautiful adventure of all." Around them, the celebration continued. Wolves from former enemy territories sharing food and stories, musicians playing songs that blended different cultural traditions, children running between tables without regard for complex adult politics. This was what they'd fought for, not just survival, but the chance to create something worth surviving for.
As midnight approached and the formal celebration wound down, Maeve and Corvin stood together on the fortress's highest balcony, looking out over their kingdom, sleeping peacefully under starlight. The exile brand on her shoulder had faded to a faint silver line, no longer a mark of shame, but a reminder of the journey that had brought her home to herself. "Any regrets?" he asked, his arm warm around her waist. "Only that it took so long to find you," she replied, leaning into his strength. Through their bond, she felt his deep contentment, his absolute certainty that they'd found what most wolves only dreamed of: partnership that multiplied rather than diminished individual strength, love that inspired rather than constrained growth, power used in service of joy rather than domination. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but they would face them as they'd faced everything else, together, unafraid, and absolutely committed to the revolutionary idea that love was the strongest force in any world. The exile had become a queen, the masked king had found his equal, and the future stretched before them like dawn breaking over mountains, bright with infinite possibility. 1 year later, Queen Maeve held their newborn daughter, a perfect blend of both parents' features with her mother's green eyes and her father's determined chin. The child's name was Hope, because that's what she represented for an entire generation of wolves learning to choose love over fear. "She'll never doubt her worth," Corvin murmured, his scarred face soft with paternal devotion. "No," Maeve agreed, watching their daughter's tiny fingers curl around her thumb with surprising strength. "She'll grow up knowing that value comes from character, not bloodline. That strength means lifting others up, not tearing them down." Outside the nursery windows, the kingdom thrived, living proof that revolution could be gentle when guided by wisdom, that transformation could heal rather than harm when rooted in love. The child who would never know exile had been born into a world remade by those who'd survived it. And that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all.